Okay, welcome and thank you for joining this webinar organised by the Institute for the Future of Work. My name is Ewan Benny and I am Director of Communications and Influence at the EY Foundation. I'm the chair for this session where we will share the findings from the Institute's research into intrinsic and internalised forms of motivation, which has been supported by the EY Foundation. This is research that has uncovered powerful insights that could have a wide-ranging impact, from helping tackle the increasing number of young people not in education, employment or training, to ensuring young people are equipped to thrive in AI-dominated workplaces of the future. Just this week, the publication of the school's white paper includes the mention of a new framework to measure a student's level of engagement, which directly links to our work on better understanding motivation. Quickly on the EY Foundation, we are a charity that exists to help ensure young people from low-income backgrounds have the same opportunity to succeed as their peers. Our ambition is every young person can secure work that is meaningful and rewarding and that they feel empowered to take control of their future. Primarily, we deliver employability skills training programs with over 28,000 young people eligible for free school meals supported since we launched nearly 12 years ago. A central question we continually return to is how can we scale up our impact and help transform the lives of all young people from a low-income background? Over the next hour, we will try to answer that question. So on the format, this will be a panel discussion with a short overview of the research findings at the beginning. In terms of the functionality of this version of Teams, there are no comments, but please submit questions, which we will answer in the second half of the webinar. Also, this session will be recorded. So we are launching 3 reports today and you'll be sent these shortly, but the primary purpose of the next hour is to bring the findings to life and to explore the practical implications of this work. To do that, I am joined by 5 fantastic panelists. First, Kester Bruin. He's the Associate Director in charge of Communications and Training Development at the Institute for the Future of Work. A secondary school teacher for more than 20 years, he has helped develop the action research workshops for the project and led on interviews with careers guidance specialists. Kester is also a writer and speaker and has helped lead the Institute's work on the impact of AI on the creative industries. Next, we have Dr. Anne-Marie Imafidon MBE. Anne-Marie is the co-founder of STEMETS, an award-winning social enterprise inspiring girls and young women into science, technology, engineering and mathematics roles. Anne-Marie also co-leads the newly established Women in Tech Task Force, launched by Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology. In 2017, she was awarded an MBE for services to young women and STEM sectors. Next, we have Peter Swallow, MP. Peter is the Labour MP for Bracknell, a member of the Education Select Committee and also the Joint Committee on Human Rights. He is chair of 3 all-party parliamentary groups, which includes the APPG for social mobility and for schools, learning and assessment. Previously, Peter was a university lecturer and teacher. Next, we have Frank Bowley. He's Head of Analysis and Insight at Skills England. He was previously Head of the Unit for Future Skills at the Department for Education. An economist by background, Frank was an advisor on macroeconomic analysis to the Treasury. He is also a visiting fellow at LSE. And our 5th panelist, David Gaughan. He's the Interim Director of Employment and Skills at the West Midlands Combined Authority. His role is to leverage devolved powers to drive productivity and growth across the West Midlands. He plays a key role in shaping the authority's ambition to connect residents to good jobs and support businesses to source future talent. Okay, so there are the introductions. We're ready to kick off. And so, Kester, over to you, if that's okay, to provide an overview of what the research has uncovered.
Many thanks, Ewan, and many thanks to all our panelists. One of the things that you can be absolutely sure of is death, taxes, and when you're doing a webinar, someone will start a massive wood chipper outside your window. So I hope that doesn't affect the audio quality too much. But really delighted to give a quick overview of the work that we're doing. We know there's been a huge amount written recently on the issue of youth unemployment, whether that be graduates struggling to get jobs or the rising number of those in the NEET category, the focus of a major review at the moment by Alan Milburn. And in the face of this huge turbulence, there are clearly things that governments and firms need to do to create and sustain demand for good jobs. One of the things that we've been doing at IFOW is kind of brilliant work on that side, with work publishing very soon on how to get AI adoption right. That's work in partnership with the CIPD. We've also been working on some of the mechanics of helping people access jobs, and some of us from IFOW will be in Cornwall on Monday showcasing a new platform which is all about helping people into green jobs. You may have seen on the news today the opening of a lithium mine in Cornwall and the huge wind projects coming on stream there. So that's all on the kind of demand side, but there's also this supply side. How can we better prepare young people for a future of work, and in particular, help them to navigate like these transition points between school, training, and work? And there are so many factors that impact how young people are able to make their way. And this is why in the work that we've been doing, we've really focused on what we call a capabilities approach, which informed our big 3-year Pistol Readers review. And that's vital because it recognizes that you can't just put more inputs in. You have to think about the context. You have to think about different people's ability to convert inputs like training, like education, to be able to extract the most value from them. What we know is that if we can nurture motivation, we can improve the receptivity of the brilliant work for those inputs that organizations are already doing on employability, skills, helping those who are most at risk of falling into that neat category, and directing them into training and employment that aligns with their motivations and with their values. So motivation kind of stops those inputs that are going in, those great things. It stops them bouncing off so much, improves that receptivity. But it also does more than that. We really believe through this work that it's a critical but sometimes overlooked component, because it not only impacts attainment and health and happiness, and that's really important for supporting, ongoing attendance at school. I was a teacher for 20 years. I know just how important that is. But it also supports the uptake of the kind of key human-centric skills that we know from lots of other work that we've been doing that employers are increasingly demanding as workplaces adopt AI systems. And that's really key to the theory of change that we've been working on with the project. We know that what we're seeing is big changes in skills demands, as Frank will tell you from the work they've been doing, analysis at Skills England, particularly in this technologizing labour market. And what's becoming more important, the data shows us, is that that the bucket of skills that people are being asked to bring to jobs is getting bigger. We know that there's kind of more tech skills that people are being asked to do, but underlying all of that, because those tech skills change so quickly, underlying that through what we're seeing in the data is that there's an increasing demand for those core human-centric skills, problem solving, communication, creative thinking, and those things. So the question is, how do young people pick those skills up? And it turns out that an intervention focused on motivation really shows strong promise on being able to do that. So that's what we did in this work. In the first part of the project, we went around the country to Bournemouth, Cornwall, Manchester, Birmingham, listening to young people talk about their futures of work and what motivated them. And we did that through a specially designed kind of future of work action research workshop. And then using the findings from that, developed an hour-long pilot intervention aimed at improving intrinsic and internal forms of motivation. And we deployed that intervention last summer through programs that the EY Foundation run through some of their programs. And the results of that are really, really promising. It was actually really, really moving to hear young people say, oh my gosh, no one's ever asked me what I really want to do before. And I know that as a teacher, I can see how that happens. Like, you can go through school and you're so focused on delivering your content for your subject. We sometimes don't kind of stop and say, hold on a minute, what do you actually want to do as a young person? So it can become a conveyor belt, and we lose sight of what each young person is for. We wanted to centre the voices of some of the young people involved in the project in this. So I'm just going to very, very quickly play a little audio clip pre-recorded from 2 young people who took part in the programme.
Before the workshop, I genuinely thought I was just bad at learning. I I would work really hard for exams, feel stressed the whole time, and still come last. Through the workshop, understanding neuroplasticity helped me see that learning is more about technique, reflection, and a positive mindset than pure pressure. That completely changed how I view my ability to grow.
Learning about neuroplasticity really changed how I think about learning new skills because it showed me that ability is something that we can work on and it isn't fixed. For example, the workshop explained that the brain strengthens its pathways the more you practice, such as building a muscle. That helped me stop seeing difficulty as a sign of failure and instead as part of growth. Now, when something feels challenging, I'm more likely to see it as my brain developing rather than me not being good enough.
The three values that matter most to me are respect, financial security, and time. The workshop helped me see that if a job does not align with these values, I would always feel like something is missing. It showed me that motivation lasts longer when your work supports the life you actually want to live.
Three values that matter most to me are growth, fairness, and meaningful work. The workshop helped me see that being motivated long term depends on whether my work aligns with these values. For example, when I reflected on past moments when I felt proud or content, I realized that those feelings came from learning as well as helping others and engaging in work that felt purposeful towards me. This helped me understand that when I'm choosing a career, it isn't just about success or money, but also finding work that reflects who I am and what my values are.
So huge thanks to all the young people who helped us with this research. You were just so generous with their kind of thoughtfulness and their reflections on that. And what those two have outlined is the kind of three parts to the pilot intervention that we ran. The first part was really about neuroplasticity, and the idea there being that you've got to believe that change is possible, and helping people to understand that growth mindset. Then a particular focus on understanding what your motivations are and what really motivates you, then channeling that towards potential careers. And the third part was a values reflection, like what really matters to you. So based on that work and the results have been really, really promising in terms of, showing really, really good results from that. And if you read the working paper, you can see the full kind of statistical analysis of that. But we've also developed a framework document to kind of help schools, career support organisations and firms to be able to deploy the principles that we've surfaced in that research. And there's some resources available from that too. So just finally, what we're really keen to do is to pilot this further. We know that, this isn't the whole picture that we've got sorted yet, hopefully across a whole series of schools. And the potential gains are absolutely huge. The cost, both financial and social, of each young person who gets caught in this neat category are enormous. So if we can do a low-cost intervention like this, something that's really preventative, that helps other inputs to really work, then that really, really could save millions financially, but also provide a huge, huge boon to the whole country.
Great, thank you, Kester, for the overview. I'll only just keep it to one question because I'm conscious we'll move to the panelists. But just in terms of, we were touching then in terms of the AI and the sort of nature of work and things changing. This is obviously a very not a technology focused solution, and it kind of feels quite intuitive. You're kind of not necessarily that surprising. Is there something that you'd want to say in terms of why this hasn't been thought about so much in the past, and why it's something that needs to really be sort of dialed up at this moment in time?
Yeah, I mean, we know that that there's very little new under the sun. We know that motivation has been important, but what I think is so key about this research now is connecting this theory of change, that in a changing labour market, when AI is really, really causing that turbulence, what this focus on motivation does is help link to that cultivation of those key skills, which then is what we know is going to help young people access that better work, and particularly those from low-income backgrounds. We know that motivation erodes over time. All children are kind of born with a similar level of motivation, it erodes, but for those from low-income backgrounds, it's particularly, we see that erosion happening more quickly. So it's actually kind of super important and protective to be able to do that. Always great to have research backing, but at this particular moment, it's really, really important in this particular labour market situation.
And just being clear, actually, just really quickly, Kester, on that point, it's nothing to do with the young person themselves. It's kind of almost like the system and what that's done to them. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are kind of internal and external factors. It's we're not saying, oh, we've got to shift all responsibility onto young people, but we are clear that this is part of a bigger picture. The stuff that governments need to do, there's stuff that regional governments need to do, the stuff that firms need to do, the stuff that we need to do as society, but also. The counterfactual, we're not saying there is no responsibility for young people. That would be absurd to say, oh, you have no responsibility. And in fact, helping young people to have that agency, to take some of that self-determination responsibility is actually extremely positive for them. Obviously, the risk is we're all going to become neat if AI really kind of goes through that kind of doom scenario that some people have talked about. So actually, in one way, what we're doing here for this particular group of young people it is kind of important for how we might deal with further problems down the line too.
Brilliant, thank you, Kester. So if I come to Anne-Marie first, if that's okay, you may have an initial first reaction to what Kester's been talking through, but also in terms of a specific question, if that's okay. I know you've consistently centred youth voice and social justice in your work. And if we're serious about channeling young people's motivations into pathways for the future of work, I just wondered if you have a view on how we ensure that those pathways are shaped with those young people rather than just for them, especially when education systems haven't always been designed equitably. Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a fantastic, I've got to say I've got skin in the game. I am co-chair of the Institute for the Future of Work. So, I like to think that I enjoy quite a lot of what the team work on and output. But I think, this notion of social justice is something that drives a lot of the work that we do at STEMETS and the work that we do with young people, specifically girls, young women and young non-binary folk, into fields where they don't have that agency actually to pick up on what Kester was just saying. When they do end up kind of in careers, they don't necessarily also have the agency in terms of the pathways that they take to these fields. And of course, we're talking about AI. A lot of that is driven by decisions being made in the STEM field from STEM professionals and STEAM professionals as well, because it's important to include the arts in there, as that's where we believe is the true heart of innovation. So yeah, what's exciting about this piece of work and the various documents that we've got, whether it's the policy brief, whether it's the kind of workshop framing and the framework for folks to use across organizations, is that again, we are talking about being asset-based in our approach. So this isn't, as we've just said, about changing the children, changing the young people, or fundamentally saying that there's something that they're missing, but this is a way for us to systematically ensure that we're working equitably with them by opening up these conversations, by giving them agency in processes, whether it's around building careers, whether it's around making choices in the transition, whether into academic field, into entrepreneurship, into industry, whatever it might be. And so for me, it's quite exciting to see ways that this can be made real at a systemic level in a way that it's not necessarily a skill set that folks have. It's not something we have a lot of good practice on. And it's something often when folks say that they do want to tap into motivations and they do want to be youth-led, it's tough. There's a knowledge gap on how do we make that happen. And so what's exciting about this is how practical it is, also how simple it is. As much as, there's no new things under the sun, as much as it's not a new thing under the sun, it's not something that's being done. And so packaging it in a way that it can be done by lots of different types of stakeholders, again, is the strengths of what we do at IFOW, but is what is needed for true systemic change. And I think the final piece that excites me is having this social justice angle on how you're engaging with young people, how you're getting them into work and getting them into good work. What excites me is that obviously there are learnings for people who are no longer young on this, that also might solve a lot of other issues that we can see across the economy, and that we'll continue to see as we're in this industrial revolution where folks are having to reskill, upskill, and their roles and their jobs are changing. So, for employers to reflect not just on those coming in, but those who are currently there. What are their motivations? What are their values? Where are we giving them the space to explore that, and how are we using that to tune and to reflect what we do as a business, how we're organised as a workplace, how we also ensure good work in this transition, I think is the other thing that really, really excites me about the nature of what's been put together, but the practical, tactical reports, tools, frameworks that we're releasing today as part of this launch.
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie. And yes, to come back to that will be as part of the reports that we'll be sending to everyone at the end of this session. Yeah, it absolutely gets into that. It's not just a research for research's sake. It's like really looking at how do we sort of start to implement this. Frank, again, any initial reaction to the research, but also in terms of a more specific question, there are some real sort of macro dimensions to this research. So things like government and business action that's going to be required, as well as sort of individuals and individual organizations. Just wondered in terms of what needs to be done from your perspective in terms of building a more coherent skills system that supports young people's progression and their ability to adapt, particularly thinking about how fast changing the labour market is at the moment and will presumably continue to be.
I'm smiling because that's a really big question. But let me first of all get on to the research. I think I haven't got through all the documents. I've read the policy briefs and some of the other ones, and I think it's incredibly useful. I mean, it does capture issues around motivation. I mean, I must say that many years ago, I was a lecturer in agricultural economics for some years and teaching farm business management, and trying to teach a demotivated class about balance sheet taught me that motivation was terribly important. But also, as an analyst, we've done lots of work on looking at sort of return to education from courses which control for lots of things. It's very hard to see motivation, and we see this missing part, which we often think is a lot of evidence that motivation. So we're confident motivation is important. It underlies a lot of the 1 million people who need motivation, need to get them into work. The government's doing a lot of work on those, and youth guarantee on training, but we need and demand getting the economy turned around. But we will need motivation for those groups. As you said already, AI is coming along, which is going to have 20 years or longer of change, and we need to make sure people want to relearn as they go through. So I thought this is, as the research goes, I think it's very good to bring it together. It's very good to provide some framework around that. That's some interesting evaluation of the policy, and again, as a hard-nosed analyst, I found that interesting, but we need some more trialing, which of course is one of the purpose of this. It needs, as someone knowing how often schools are asked to do things, we'll need some actual sort of probably more bigger trials with some more evaluation in it. So I hope support the work to do that one. But going to your bigger question about things, I mean, to a certain degree, as I already said, I mean, AI is coming. We already, I mean, prior to 2023, no one was talking about AI, and now suddenly everyone is talking about AI, and every change in the labour market, including the sort of impact on graduate labour and the reductions in vacancies have been put to AI. I think sometimes the hype's very high, but it is clear we need more people to know about AI. One reason the government's doing its 10 million target to getting AI skills into 10 million people. And we need people to upskill as the works change. But get people to do that will be incredibly difficult, particularly when they're already in the labour market. Going away there and doing some further training is going to be really difficult. So thinking about that and not sure exactly how AI is going to play out, I think what will be important is core skills. I think Kester mentioned that. Issues about creativity, teamwork, communication, those core skills. Research for NFER picked that up at the moment. We need to concentrate on that. That's not to say that knowledge and technical skills aren't also important, but having that is key, and having to be able to measure that and understand it and make sure it's done is important. Having better information around, so the new career service bringing together jobs and the National Career Service will help that. Skills England's doing a lot of work improving information, focusing not just on people's prior careers and their qualifications, but what skills are involved in that, so people can move between jobs more easily and more identify the new skills they need much more easily will be important. So we just produced something called a standard skills classification. It's a taxonomy people have heard about, where we look at skills much more closely, and we're going to get that out so people think about skills more than just qualifications and jobs. And you mentioned private industry. I think private industry is going to be incredibly getting industry to involved in this directly. Again, it's another key part of Skills England. There's co-ownership of the skills skills system between businesses and government. Part of that is making sure businesses involve in formal education like apprenticeships and V levels and schools, so that they're part engaged with formal education. But I think it's really important that businesses actually provide more training themselves. A lot of these courses we're talking about are small interventions. Your intervention was an hour. Google did some really interesting work on AI, which again were very small interventions, where I think government could get involved, but governments bring a certain degree of bureaucracy. It has to, because it's taxpayers' money. Whereas when businesses spending their own money in their own time, I think it can be a lot more flexible, put in part of their course, part of their work much more easily. And we do know over the last 10, 20 years, the amount of time and money businesses and put it into their own training has been declining. So one thing we do need to do as Skills England is to sort of reverse that and help that improve. And finally, as I said, motivation, making sure people actually engage in this is incredibly important. So teaching people to stay connected with training, I think, is key.
Thank you, Frank. So yeah, it feels like it's not, this isn't about replacing anything, but it's an addition. So there's obviously still going to be critically important with the technical skills development, human centric we've talked about, and then motivation. I think it all comes together. It's not about, you know, one thing or another. David, if it's okay to come to you, and again, if there was initial reactions from the headlines that Kester shared, but also from a regional perspective, and what makes the difference between sort of national policy and something that genuinely works for young people at key transition points at a local level.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Kester, for sharing the research. And it was quite powerful to hear those voice notes from Jasmine and Maria, because it's really important for us to understand what young people are saying, what they think about the system, which we create. Often many of us around this table have been involved in the creation of that system which they operate in, and how often do we get the opportunity to actually hear from young people in terms of their views about how things can work for them and build their motivation and aspiration of for their futures and the careers which they want to lead, and have agency in that, which I think is a really important word when we talked about that. But when to pick up on the question as well, Ewan, just in terms of transitions, I think there's a real challenge at the moment, and what generally works and who owns transition. The system is complicated, and I'm a skills nerd, been in this world for a while, and when you think about all the initiatives and skills programs out there, if you're a young person, how on earth can you actually work out what is the best route for you to take, when even some skills nerds such as me find it difficult to remember all these types of things which are actually coming out? So who owns that, and who can bring that coherence and alignment at a local level to support a young person in terms of their aspirations and motivations about where they want to go and how they can channel that? And I think the SEND and the schools white paper, which was issued on Monday, will help in some ways about how transition will happen and how we can manage transition more effectively, support young people to enable them to have some agency in the paths they want to move forward on. I think it's also really important to think about young people's experience. So just going back to that point from what Jasmine and Maria's story, how do we use those experiences to support our commissioning and skills design, and how do we continue to use that evidence? There is lots of evidence out there, but we continually push ourselves in terms of how can we use research such as this to help us make a difference on the ground. We've got our mayor's youth plan, which is there to focus and drive down NEET. Currently, we've got 30,000 young people in NEET within this region. We've got a population bulge of 16 to 18 year olds, so we know we're going to have a challenge in terms of how we can actually reduce that NEET figure over long term. So this research is really, really important, but it's also important to remember that young people don't live nationally; they live in a place. So how do we bring that coherence and that collaboration and true partnership across key partners within the system to make that difference? And then coming back to that final point when you talked about agency and how do we provide agency to young people? We do want to be able to build that aspiration opportunities, but how do we enable the demand side to bring those opportunities to young people? Earlier we talked about STEAM, and that STEAM's really important about how we build innovation and using the arts as levers for how we can stimulate creativity in young people to think about the agency that they want and how they're going to take that forward. So I think there's quite a lot we need to do about empowering young people in the system, and this research is really helpful because it talks about agency, it talks about motivation and aspiration, which we're seeing as key blockers for young people to move into opportunities in future work.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, David. I think that sort of point of someone like meeting young people where they're coming from and kind of not just like downloading, new training and really bringing the two perspectives together. I think it's really, really important. Peter, I know you've heard a bit about this work. You attended the roundtable event we ran at the Labour Party conference in September, but I wondered if you had any initial reflections on the build that's happened since that research that we first talked about at the end of last year, from what Kester said, but also from your perspective, from a parliamentary perspective, from being on the Education Select Committee, and like, where does the national system struggle most in supporting young people's transition from school to work?
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who's already spoken. Just to pick up on the conversation around AI, I just wanted to flag that as a member of the Education Select Committee, that just today we've launched our inquiry into AI and EdTech. So anyone with an interest in this, do think about contributing. Look, I think it is fair to say that young people find this transition really scary. All young people do, and I think in part that has been because we've not been very good at speaking to young people about what the skills that they are being taught actually are. We've been very, good at focusing on academic qualifications and sort of focusing on a very old-fashioned, if I may say, way of viewing what school is. But we've not been very brave in saying, actually, whatever subject you're doing, whether it's history or computer science or a vocational subject, you are learning certain skills, certain essential skills, and supporting young people to capture the skills that they're learning and translate that into presenting themselves to an employer as somebody ready to work, ready for the world of work. When I speak to employers in my constituency, they say the same thing as young people are saying, which is that they are just not confident enough in the skills that young people have. And I've always felt that actually our education system at the moment needs to do more to develop these skills, but to some extent these skills are already being developed. We're just not supporting young people to recognise and draw those out. So that's why really pleased to see so much on focus on that from government, whether it is the schools white paper which we just released, or the curriculum and assessment review, the post-16 skills white paper, obviously setting up of Skills England, a huge amount of work being done. I think we have to get young people into a place where they just feel a bit more confident to go to an interview, to speak to an employer about all of the talents that they bring. And that's also why, may I say, it's really important that we're developing an oracy framework, because I know from experience that one thing young people really struggle with at the moment is feeling confident just speaking about themselves and their experience, and that does make it really difficult for them to get through an interview, and it also makes it difficult for them when they're in the workplace. So there's some of the steps that we're taking. I think it's really important that we keep up the work. And then obviously alongside all of this is the work the government is doing to tackle NEETs through Department for Work and Pensions. So huge amount going on, huge amount more to do. Can I just finally pick up on another really important aspect of the schools white paper, and that's about more of a focus on young people's welfare. And I'm so pleased to see that embedded throughout the report as well. I have always believed that young people fare better in schools and colleges when they are enjoying what they are learning. Actually, no matter what it is that they are learning, right? Learning is supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be fun to learn. So I do think that we need to get back to that, and we should be less apologetic when we say that school should be a place that young people feel that they belong and that they enjoy. And you can do that alongside having high academic standards and a really knowledge and skills rich curriculum, because ultimately that's what young people want to get out of their school lives.
Thank you, Peter. The enjoyment that speaks really well to this research and what it's showing, and the power of that. We really want to get to some questions from the audience. There was one question maybe before we do that, just for everyone. So in terms of, I think there's been general consensus around the range of so it's motivation, there's skills, as access to good work. All these sort of different things need to come together. But I just wondered if there was a sense from panelists in terms of like what success would look like for this work, and kind of in 5 years' time, for example, like how would we imagine a different kind of skill system looking like, and what sort of impact that might have for young people. I don't know if there's anyone who'd want to come in on that.
I mean, it may be sensible if I start, Ewan, seeing as I helped lead the research, and just to say many thanks to the fantastic team at IFAW and also at the UI Foundation, and also all the kind of young people and other people involved in this. What I would say, what would success look like? I mean, I think first of all, there are some elements here on kind of embedding more autonomy supportive practices, and that could be within teacher training. As I say, I was trained as a teacher, and Frank, I'm sure teaching agricultural economics can be tricky, but you should try year 9 simultaneous equations and talk about motivation there. And if you can succeed in that, then you can believe that you can make a difference in terms of motivation in other ways. So, but I think more autonomy supportive practices embedded throughout schools. So that's part of what we're doing in this work. Yes, there's the intervention, but then there's the kind of principles and framework. And this is, I mean, it's so important. What we're not saying is, oh, this needs to be an extra into schools, or it needs to replace whatever. We know there's brilliant stuff going on. We know that we've got the new Gatsby frameworks. What we're saying is, benchmarks, sorry. What we're saying is, look, this is a kind of a new emphasis that can really help receptivity for the other stuff. So what we'd hope to see, first of all, we would love to see a further pilot of this, and we'd hope to see that then roll out nationally. And actually, we would hope to see real measurable effects in those places, of fewer young people, going into that neat category, and more young people having that sense of a real agency.
Great, thank you, Kester. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on kind of imagining what a future might look like in this space, if there was this sort of this change in how young people are supported.
Happy to chip in if you want.
Go on, David.
Yeah, cheers, Frank. So I think from a regional and local perspective, we launched our West Midlands Growth Plan last year with an aim to create 100,000 jobs across high growth clusters in the region. And then off the back of that, in September, we launched our West Midlands Works, which is a focus of how we can move 90,000 residents into work. And that's young people, it includes young people in that space. So we've got a big ambition there to join the dots here of how do we bring demand and supply together more effectively, more coherently. So I think that's one of the big challenges for us. So through this type of research and the system we want in the longer term, and also the ambitions of government through its missions to create a youth guarantee, it's really important that we take that opportunity to drive down NEET. But how ambitious are we to do that? And if I was to say right now that I want to reduce NEET by 50%, that would be reducing it by 15,000 currently. That's a huge number, and then we've got to sustain that. But that's the level of ambition which we need to set ourselves to really make a demonstrable sort of difference, because at the moment we're focused on programs and activity, whereas through this research we're focusing more on upstream interventions to think about young people in this space, so that if we get the interventions right upstream, that claimant number, that need number, will actually reduce in time. So it's how do we really accelerate our work upstream in that space to build a motivation and aspirations so that we can actually reduce our NEET figures by 50% in 5 or actually maybe 10 years' time.
Thanks, David. I think, Frank, you're going to come in.
I mean, at one level, I mean, again, it's a big question. At one level, I mean, ultimately, we want more people in good work and higher productivity and ultimately this growth driving this economy. That's a fairly not particularly useful answer. But in Skills England focuses more on the adult skills, and to think about what we need there, I think we need a sort of system that can support people throughout their sort of career, because people are going to have longer careers and see more change. I mean, we're putting in places like more flexible training, things like the lifelong learning entitlement LLE, more foundation apprenticeships and flexible apprenticeships, a whole range of things. We have to put more career guidance so people can choose the right course resources, going back to David's point, that they can match what the skills they have and what skills they need, and then what's actually in demand in the economy. But I mean, and those are lots of things going on which are sort of outside this particular bit of research. But I do, going back to this research, is we need people which will actually engage in the system, and I do, not just in the UK but around the world, adult retraining or get adults to train is incredibly difficult because they've done their education, they don't want to go back in, and unless there's a quite clear movement into a better job. So actually getting people to enjoy education in school, but also see the ability to retrain and further their sort of skills as they go through their work, but also more generally, I think would be really important. So I think put this bit in a broader aspect of improving sort of training support for people throughout the career would be incredibly important.
Thank you, Frank.
I think the perils of going lost, and I think that for me it would be, one is a high efficacy of the interventions that we do see proposed for this target group. This is a framework being applied across those. I think that, that was definitely the biggest delta we saw across the research. That'd be one. Second would be better markers across well-being measures, which, just to add what amp up what may have already been said by folks, but that notion of well-being and work, I think, is something we might be able to explore and understand a little bit more how that's impacted with the mental health almost kind of element of people approaching work and feeling agency with the work that they do end up doing. There's something that the final piece is around the social mobility, right? If we come back to the social justice lens and the types and the groups that we kind of concentrated on in this side of research. And I think there is something of, is there greater potential for social mobility if folks from whatever background they are able to engage actively in the workforce over an extended period of time and take these habits and these foundations into adulthood? What your career ends up being, in theory, even through an industrial revolution, is definitely, if you start well, you can end well, right? Or you can at least you're set up for success. So I think a more diverse, actively engaged workforce ultimately would be it, and whether that shows up in productivity, economic growth, or hope, or joy, or whatever else it would be at work, I think we can pick a measure that we like.
Perfect. Thanks, Anne-Marie. I don't know if Peter, you wanted to come in quickly on this. We're going to go to some questions from the audience, but just in terms of, I guess, like what you'd see success in this area.
I'll be very, very brief. Success means more young people in work and fewer out of work and need. It's as simple as that. It's a massive national challenge that we have to grasp. And whilst we have 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment, and training, there is huge amounts of work to do.
Right. Thanks, Peter. So first question from the audience, I'll just read this through. So this is from Keith. So today the hat I'm wearing is a careers advisor holding space for careers conversations with year 9s, one of whom has already shared with me her lack of hope in the light of so many wars going on. How do we develop formulas that support hope and motivation in this context? Did your workshops consider this aspect? So I guess, Kirsty, you probably should come in first, but then maybe...
Yeah. Thanks, Kath. That's a really, really fantastic question. And in terms of the first workshops we did, where we were going around listening to young people, we definitely saw much of that surfaced. Yeah. One of the questions we asked them was, first of all, what do you think the economy is? And there's some really interesting answers there. And of course, this was a workshop which was trying to listen, but also in terms of action research, but by the very nature of asking the question, it's helping them to understand a bit further. So, even going down the sweet shop, you're part of the economy. But then, the question, like, who benefits most from the economy? And the biggest answer to that was, oh, that's the government. Now, we understood from that, digging deeper, that what they're seeing is a sense of alienation from the bigger picture, that actually, they don't really mean, oh, that the government are taking everything, but they're sensing like, oh yeah, it's just that, these kind of bigger forces out there. And then through kind of understanding, well, hold on a second, if you had agency to be able to kind of step into that, you are, entering a future of work, and what could you do with that? So exciting people around, there is, hope, aspiration, and motivation kind of all go together. and that it's up to, you know, a generation of people to be able to kind of push on that. That's actually really, really important. But local agency, I think, as David was talking about, you know, super, super important. Everyone works in place, and that's extremely important, that people understand not just what jobs are in their local area, but what good work looks like. And as Anne-Marie knows, as our chair at I4W, what we're about is not just more employment, but more good quality work. And that's work that's got autonomy, it's work that's got dignity, a sense of fair pay, because we know that that kind of work actually builds towards a good society, a flourishing society. And if you've got more people in good work, I hate to overstretch, but you've probably got fewer wars going on. So you know, kind of building from that point in the local, I think, is going to be super important.
Thanks, Kester. Actually, just another question, which is perhaps more applicable for everyone else if they want to jump in. So someone who works in early careers, particularly with a view to levelling the playing field for young people from low-income backgrounds, how do you see employers best integrating this research into their application and hiring process? If anyone wants to come in on that one.
Well, can I just flag here that there are some fantastic employers out there who do a huge amount of work on this, including reporting pay gaps for employees with socioeconomic status, blind recruiting, so there is less concern about this, as well as obviously various schemes to get young people into work from disadvantaged backgrounds through apprenticeships and other means. One thing that I think I would love to see more businesses being really thoughtful about is how they offer work experience. And actually, you know, it is, I speak to companies in my constituency who are doing really great work on this, and then I say to them, oh, you know, what do you do for work experience? And they say, oh, you know, that's quite difficult, so usually we only do it if someone's you know, a relative of someone already working here. And I think, but you're doing so much great work and then you trip up at that final hurdle, because it is really difficult for young people who are growing up in households where they do not have experience of working in sectors where actually we want them to be ambitious about working in, to get their foot in the door. We've known that for a long, long time. And I think some sectors have been better at addressing that than others. It is not always easy. I totally get that. But I think it's something that I'd really love to see more employers take a really significant step forwards on. And I say this knowing that EY, for example, do fantastic at this, but I think, you know, best practice needs to be shared around.
Yeah, great. Do anyone else on this question? We've got others that I'll come to, but just if there's anyone else on this one. David.
Yeah, happy to add to that. I think there's also a challenge for employers as well at the moment in terms of their hiring strategies. AI actually is a particular challenge in terms of the hiring strategies within business, and I've been speaking to quite a number of large employers recently and small employers about how they're managing AI applications which are coming through at scale en masse, and employers are actually adopting new entry points into their businesses as well, recognizing automation and AI and the impact of that, and what they're seeing is in terms of skills needs. And we talked about the core and essential skills which are changing over time. 2 years ago we were talking about soft skills, we're now talking about transversal skills, so these aspects of agile learning and how you can adopt AI within your thinking and critical thinking to help you problem solve within the business. And these are core skills which many of our businesses are now seeking. And that's where Peter's point about work experience is really important. But for those employers who can't provide work experience, and I would encourage that all employers try to do that, because it's highly rewarding for an individual, because you're 6 times more likely to be in work if you've had meaningful work experience than those who haven't. But also think about life projects and how can young people actually develop projects and projects they can work on within school. Going back to this research about motivation and aspiration, if we can actually set real life projects for young people, solving problems within business, I think young people have got a massive role to play in that, because they are digitally literate, many of them, but we need, again, it goes back to that point about empowering and how we can empower young people, and actually employers can actually empower them in a slightly different way than the norm. So I think there's opportunities there for employers to engage in a slightly different, in many ways, and I think we've got to try and make that a little bit easier for employers and translate that in terms of what they can actually do.
Just very quickly, Ewan, on that, one story from one of the workshops we did, and I know Anne-Marie will be delighted to hear this, but talking to a bunch of young people, I think it was down in Cornwall somewhere, and a sense of a bit of disengagement and blah 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 and all the rest of it. And then this kid goes, "Oh, do you want to see the 6-port phone charger that I built?" And his teacher and I were like, "What?" And he pulled this thing out of his bag. He felt it was completely unrelated to what we're doing. But yeah, no, I get up in the morning, I do a bit of work on electronics. This is absolutely brilliant. Like, what we found in this research, which is so great, was that all young people are motivated by so many things. But this is why we've called it channeling motivation, but channeling that motivation towards a future of work that they're excited about is really, really important. And I think businesses, as Anne-Marie will know, can learn so much from young people who can bring extraordinary skills to that. But we just need to get that kind of match-up point right for how that happens, as David says.
Don't know if you want to come in. I know Anne-Marie, you mentioned a couple of times. I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Well, I'm almost building an answer to a couple of different questions, but I think there's a lot that businesses can do, and I wonder whether it is, again, as we've already said, kind of concentrated on the application and hiring process. So to go back to that specific question, I think there's a lot around recruitment practices in businesses that maybe aren't necessarily fit for purpose or evolving with the times. And I think it's interesting, David, I was reading something yesterday about kind of businesses complaining about folks using AI to apply for jobs, but then folks applying for jobs complaining that businesses are using AI to kind of evaluate who they are, right? We see a lot of young people coming up with skills that aren't necessarily presented in a way that are recognized by business. And so I think there is something more about translation, but also, what's the inclusive practice you have around, the skills-based interviews that you are building and that you're doing. And when you ask particular questions, what are you assuming about, connections, about capital, cultural capital, social capital, STEM capital in the candidates that you have coming through. And so I think there's a lot that businesses need to do in terms of understanding different types of excellence, different types of talent. But, to Kate's question, I think one thing is around the application process. The other is also when that person is within the business and within the organization. And so I think there's a task for businesses. Maybe there's policy, maybe there's something stronger that is needed, or based on a future pilot of this work around work experience specifically. This is something that we're now having to work with our young people on, experience of work, and how they're having to parlay the experiences they have on STEMEX programs, which are in businesses with employers, but aren't that traditional work experience kind of format, for that to be recognised that actually you've been in the building, you've met those folks, you've worked on a project, you've used a tool that they've had, you've demonstrated various different skills, you've developed skills as well in this process, you've learned how you've learned. And so how are we able to then work with organisations to say they don't look like the current people that have made it through your recruitment process, but there's someone that still has value. The other example I'll give is talking to someone a couple of weeks ago who had used AI and given, I think, Copilot a couple of CVs, and they were about to go through a recruitment process, and it kind of spun out a couple of folks that it had as its top, and this person also then ran a day with their selection panel, and they were kind of marveling to me that it'd come up with the same answers from their day that they'd run versus what they put into the AI, and they were very pleased. They're like, we're going to save the time. With me then thinking, my goodness, your process, how is your process coming up with exactly the same as the AI has come up with? Does it have the same blind spots that you have? And why is that not something that's been part of the conversation that we're having? That how alarming is it that AI has come up with exactly the same thing in such a short period of time, versus you going through, talking through, having nuances, maybe bringing your experience to the table, which AI presumably wouldn't have had the experiences that you've had around the table. And so I think there's a lot of discussions, and we have this in our kind of wider kind of wheelhouse at the IFOW, of what does good look like. And we've spoken about dignity, we've spoken about learning, spoken about growth, and so how do we allow folks to apply that lens across all different stages of what employers might be doing in terms of work?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Great answer. I'm just conscious of time. I think we could squeeze one question in, and then Kess will do a wrap up at the end. So I think this one lends itself to a quick round the group answer. So this question is: when you were a young learner, what's one thing that motivated you and that you would like to see more of? So I don't know if anyone's be ready to go with that.
I went to a state grammar school and I was lucky enough to study the subject that happened to be the subject that I loved, which was classics. And while I'm not saying that all schools across the country are going to introduce that particular subject, what I think was important was that I was able to study a subject that I enjoyed. And that's why it's so great that in the school's white paper, we're talking about getting more arts and humanities subjects back on the curriculum, but also a greater breadth across subjects. Because I do think young people should be able to study what makes their heart sing.
Thank you, Peter. Anyone else on what's motivated
You're
them?
muted, Frank.
Sorry, as I said, learning how to turn off mutes is probably the first thing I should learn. I mean, I know I'm in Schools England, everyone talks about STEM. I mean, I should just point out my children are doing history and English. So it suggests that actually I appreciate humanities as much as anything, and creativity and that broader analytical work is terribly important. And the reason they're doing those, I did sciences when I there, is I think that doing things which you enjoy. And when you think at A levels, you have to do things, and degrees you have to do things which you actually enjoy as well. My one thing about motivation, I think, is actually problem solving and sitting down there and working out how problems is incredibly important, and actually and it can come in all sorts of ways. Cassie, your view of someone creating a 6-point thing, or cutting as a civil servant being given a particularly difficult policy thing, I think is incredibly important, and having that ability to actually demonstrate your skills in your work or in your education and making differences is incredibly important, which goes to that idea of good jobs as well.
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Happy to go, Ewan. So just from a lived experience perspective, I left school with absolutely nothing. School wasn't for me, so I went to work for a youth training scheme. But what motivated me was the element of somebody believed in me, they trusted me, and then they encouraged me. And off the back of that led me down this career path of what I'm in now, where I went back to college, into university, and now, I've given evidence to select committees. I've worked at some of the greatest universities in the world, but all from that input right at the start, and as a young 16-year-old, in terms of somebody actually believing in me to make a difference in my work and what I could do, and trusting me to get on with it, and then giving that encouragement, which is very aligned to what things we've been talking about today in terms of motivation and aspiration. So I've got that lived experience, and I think that's what we all need to kind of think about. How do we empower people in that space to have that opportunity as we move forward?
Brilliant. Thank you, David. I don't know, Anne-Marie, if you wanted to jump in.
For me, although we've got a great question that's coming from Celine on entrepreneurship that I was hoping we had the time to get to, but mine was maybe I link the two together. Mine is the tingle of learning something new that connects to something I already knew, that's getting me closer to solving a wider problem, which arguably is what entrepreneurship, the roller coaster of entrepreneurship, is all about. But yeah, for me, it's the tingle of learning something new, not just for the sake of learning something new, but in order to then apply it to an existing problem.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And yeah, just conscious that we've not got to all the questions, but we are getting close to being out of time. And it'd be really good, Kester, just to bring it back to sort of next steps for this work. So apologies for the questions we haven't answered in the session. But as we close it, so it feels like this work that the Institute's done so far opens like a lot of different possibilities in terms of the direction it could take, and that could be from curriculum reform to regional delivery to employer practice. Just wondered, Kester, just in the last minute or so that we've got, do you have a view on like where we should really be focusing? Where should the energy and attention be going in terms of next steps?
Thanks, Ewan. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we're very, very keen to build on the really promising early results that we've got from our pilot intervention to be able to kind of, do a wider pilot on that. We really, really love people to get in touch with us if you're kind of interested in doing that, perhaps as a school or an employment support organisation and so on, or, working with combined authorities. So please do get in touch with us on that. And yeah, what we'd really like to do is to see this kind of work and these kind of principles be embedded more widely. Just very, very quickly to answer Celine's question a little bit about AI and sorry, about innovation, and to finish with a kind of vision of something. I was down in Bournemouth doing one of the sessions there, and it was in an old department store, and they had a kind of innovation hub with businesses kind of starting there. And I thought, well, why aren't we doing kind of work experience and young enterprise in that space, bringing young people in from schools to see what's going in, bringing people in from universities as a kind of crystallizing innovation thing. Really exciting, really great space, great coffee, great food. So to see places like that where people are excited about the possibilities of future work would be, I think, a wonderful thing to get to. And motivation then kind of builds itself as a virtuous circle.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kester. We've got a few seconds left. So thank you to you. Thank you to all the panelists who brought so many thoughts and reflections to this discussion. A huge thank you to you. Thank you for everyone who's been watching this session. There will be an email that's sent to everyone who's signed up, which has links to the report. So please download those, take a look. And to repeat Kester's request that if this is an area that you'd be interested in exploring more with us in terms of next steps, please do get in touch. That is our focus now in terms of like, what do we do next with this work? So finishing up, thank you so much for taking part in the session, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.